All right, so we looked across the generations with Charlotte, and then we looked into different ways of communicating. And now we're going to look into a bit more details within the older generation in terms of how different contexts play into their privacy behaviors and preferences and values. Today with Yi Xing, who is a tenure track faculty at the Max Planck Institute.
Yay. Okay, the magic works. Hi everyone. I'm happy to be here and share the work I've done with my collaborators at University of Michigan and King's College London, cross-contextual examination of older adults' privacy concerns, behaviors, and vulnerabilities. So thanks to Katie, we have a very good stage set up for why we need to research on older adults. So I wouldn't repeat that, but what I would want to highlight is if we look at media narratives, there are a lot of stereotypes about older adults. So in terms of tech use, they are left behind in the digital divide. For scams in particular, people often say older adults are disproportionately targeted, and once targeted, they are more likely to fall prey. So this is actually what motivates us to do the research is prior work often look at older adults' concerns and behaviors, but rarely touch on the concept of vulnerability. So we're interested in knowing how do older adults think about their own vulnerability, and do the media narratives match their lived experience? And even for older adults, concerns and behaviors which are relatively well understood, we notice a lack of cross-contextual perspective. If we look at existing work such as contextual integrity, privacy concerns and behaviors are context dependent. And individuals can, depending on the situation, exhibit anything range from extreme concern to apathy of privacy. But prior work on older adults most often conduct the study on individual single contexts, such as social media or healthcare. And we want to do a cross-contextual comparison. What are older adults' privacy concern, behavior, and vulnerability across context? So to this end, we conducted 43 semi-structured interviews with older adults living in the US in summer 2021. And their age ranged from 65 to 89 years old. For recruitment, we try to diversify the sample for a mix of age, gender, education, and socioeconomic status. So for example, we started with the University of Michigan Health Research Portal, which is a pool of people interested in participating in health research. But then we found participants from this channel were predominantly white and highly educated. So considering the racial disparity in the US, we in turn partnered with a Healthier Black Elderly Center for complementary recruitment effort. We further partnered with 3 local senior centers and did a lot of snowball sampling when possible. So for the cross-contextual comparisons, we structure our interview questions in 5 scenarios. And we tried asking consistent questions across the scenarios, from account and device sharing to cybercrime and healthcare and so forth. So for example, do you have any issues or concerns regarding one particular technology? And what action, if any, have you taken to mitigate your concerns? And how do you view the possibility of experiencing a particular harm compared to those older or younger than you? So now on to the findings. I encourage you to refer to our paper for many context-specific findings. What I want to highlight for this talk is some key takeaways we have from the cross-contextual comparisons. First is from cybercrime. Even though cybercrime is only one of the 5 scenarios, we found participants proactively bring up their concerns about cybercrime and negative experiences without us probing. And when discussing cybercrimes, participants refer to scams, fraud, phishing attacks, fraudulent charges, and identity theft as specific instances. There's this quote from the cybercrime scenario when one participant who actually ran a computer supply company, so quite tech-savvy, but he lost money to a ransomware scam. And he described we have our computer locked up by a software company. They sold us a software package for $150 that will guarantee that we will not have our system locked up. And they paid. And then they contacted Git Squad. And it's only until then that he figured it's a scam. But examples of cybercrime also emerge in other contexts, such as social media. So in this case, this participant described, one day I got 1,000 friends requests, which can be exaggerated, but I accept all of them on my page. Then I realized, starting from there, I get all these phone calls from people trying to swagger me. So cybercrime is quite universal across context, but what we found about vulnerability perception is that they vary across context. So for cybercrime, naturally, because our participants had such heightened concerns, this is the only scenario where most participants believe they are more vulnerable than the younger generations. And here are some specific wordings they use, and in some ways they actually reflect stereotypes about older adults. So low tech savviness as one factor that amplify vulnerability. They describe themselves being naive with regard to technology. Other things like being too trusting, believe everything they see, or being subjected to emotional manipulation. So participants describe themselves being more susceptible to scammers, working on our emotions, like the grandparent scam. Seniors are lonely and just want somebody to talk to. But in other contexts, the age-based difference of perceived vulnerability actually disappeared. So participants thought in these other contexts, older and younger people are equally vulnerable, and they identified some other factors that mattered more in their opinion. In the online advertising scenario, this participant highlighted education, which can be a proxy for digital literacy. So somebody with less education might be distracted by these ads, whatever their age is. Have you learned to research? Have you learned critical thinking? In the healthcare scenario, this participant highlighted both one's health condition and tech use, specifically usage pattern of patient portals. So I do have medical issues. I'm in and out of the portal more than a lot of people. So I think the more you use the system, the higher the risk of being compromised. Some of our cross-contextual findings also add more nuances to prior work. One thing is prior work often highlight the predominantly passive mitigation strategies among older adults. What that means is if they had privacy concerns, they tend to just give up, abandon the technology. But what we observe is a mix of passive and active mitigation strategies. So a lot of our participants actually use the subscribe feature in email, and some of them know and sometimes use the private browsing mode. And some of them will go out of their way to configure privacy settings on social media. But another finding from the cross-contextual comparison is that if we look at their concern and behaviors focus, it's actually only around the information collection stage compared to other stages where privacy violations can also occur when we look at Solov's taxonomy of privacy, for example. And so for participants who felt they are more in control, it often stems from the feeling that I don't really put much out there. But only a few very tech-savvy participants get to see concerns about how companies aggregated and draw inferences from collected data. So this finding also provides some pointers for educational efforts in terms of we should raise more awareness among older adults of the downstream effects of data collection. And in terms of our findings implications, one point is that we should start to rethink privacy vulnerability at aging. Because in prior work on usable security and privacy, older adults have been a classic example of a vulnerable, at-risk, or marginalized population. While the terms can have a lot of nuances, from our finding, we see even with only 43 participants, and this is a qualitative study, we see that older adults are a very highly heterogeneous group. And we have quite some tech-savvy and privacy-savvy participants who serve as guardians and influencers of their peers. And some of them say they will teach computer classes at senior centers or give privacy tips. And we may want to think more about the consequences of using a vulnerability framing, because it can be disempowering, especially in the cybercrime case when older adults' concerns are already very heightened. Scams have always had the underreported problem, and older adults experience significant emotional distress and stigma from prior work. And instead, how about let's consider a strength-focused approach when designing privacy interventions and education, and think about how we can enable older adults to use their merits, such as crystallized intelligence. in terms of the contextual effects, our findings do not disapprove the whole argument of contextual integrity, because some of our findings still support a lot of the concerns and behaviors are specific to the context. But our findings suggest that some concerns, such as those related to cybercrimes, can carry over to other contexts, and the direction for future work can be systematically quantifying and measuring how and when concerns become universal to everyone, or is specific to a population, the context, or individual. And then lastly, reflecting on our research methodology, this is a very slow process we engage when we went deep into the community and take more than 2 years to wrap up the research. And it's not because older adults are hard to recruit, right? We can start with convenient sampling from our parents or grandparents if we want, but we deliberately choose to partner with senior centers, and the staff members there gave us very valuable feedback on our research and recruitment and the language to use in our interview. And we also thought about what can we give back to the community, because sometimes it's not just about the money. So in this case, we actually pair up with them to deliver a series of online self-defense workshops where we can give older adults concrete knowledge in return. And what's nice about it is that we can also draw from the interview data and customize our workshops, such as using their language when we deliver the knowledge and prioritize the topics they want to learn. But this is a very slow science approach of doing research, I would say. So team members change, our own bandwidth change, and we didn't continue the effort beyond the 3 senior centers. So one question I want to bring to the table to our community and academics to think in general is what structural incentives we can create in terms of, say, review culture and funding opportunities so that we can encourage researchers to take a slow, equitable, and ethical approach when working with older adults and at-risk communities in general. And that's all my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Down here in the front, please.
Hello. Hi, thanks for the amazing talk. I'm wondering if you could go into a bit more detail when you talk about like a strengths-based approach, maybe give some like more concrete details about what does that mean and how does that look like in practice?
Yes. So crystallized intelligence is a term I mentioned in the presentation, didn't get to elaborate, so thanks for the question. So that's a term that basically refers to how older adults get to learn from years of experience, or in a more simple term, common sense. And that's the thing they mention a lot when talking about their strategies for scam is, say, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. And really it cannot, I guess it's hard to boil that down to very concrete write-up. It's really something that just one takes years to learn, but older adults get to do this, younger adults not so much, especially not Gen Alpha, right? So that's something, I guess, when we do scam education or privacy education in general, is something we can emphasize. Just give them more confidence, highlight crystallized intelligence and other merits and strengths that are unique to the older adults population. And I think that can go a long way in terms of like building their resilience against harms.
All right, we have time for one last question before going on to the next speaker. Or if you prefer to hear my questions. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit more, and you really highlighted it nicely in that last slide, but how can we effectively participate with these communities as researchers so we're being respectful of their concerns and their needs, and also doing things that can help them have technologies and other, privacy-related techniques that are directed really well at them?
Yes, I'm going to steal a lot of content from the Monday workshop on at-risk communities. Why sitting there as the organizer, thanks to that. I think it really comes down to researchers have the thinking of partner with people who work on the ground with at-risk communities and be humble and listen to their wants and needs, and have their intake from the beginning. Like in this case, I think we bring in the senior center staff as early as when we have the draft protocol, and they really gave very useful feedback. But I will say a lot of times the timeline doesn't align or incentives don't align, and so it takes a lot of back and forth conversation, and sometimes the collaboration might not work. But I think at least making the effort to have the conversations can really help. And then part of it is us working on papers, but part of it can be maybe generate something that's useful for them in return. And then also customize kind of maybe having some slow science community-based work going on, but then have some other work that's more straightforward in terms of execution that doesn't really, I guess, quote unquote, hurt one's job market if they're, because people do bean counting, right? So just put it out there. So we need a balance over there.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Let's thank the speaker one last time.